The book of Isaiah. Today we continue on with the oracles concerning the nation. And real quickly we'll review what we went over last week. We talked about Isaiah 13 and verse 1, the burden. Some versions use the word oracles. The burden of oracles against Babylon is the first one that's talked about. We discussed the idea of what that burden, what the term burden meant, and what was behind that. It wasn't that Isaiah was presenting good news, happy news. He was not presenting good news and happy news, because the message he had for Judah and Israel was one that you've been disobeying God for so many years. There's a time coming when that punishment's going to be meted out for that. And we talked about the purpose of the oracles. And one of those was trust in the strength of God and not in alliances with other nations. That seems to be Isaiah's approach there. Don't trust your military neighbors and their strength. Trust in God if you want to be truly safe. Second lesson we talked about last week, God rules in all nations of the world. And looking at the state of the world in the days of Isaiah, the state of the world in our day today, you wonder, where is God in all of that? But we have to remember that no matter what's going on in all of that, God is still in charge of all nations. And whatever's going on according to His will, we may not understand it, may not appreciate it, may not even like it, but we have to have the trust that God knows what He's doing. Daniel 4 and verse 25 says, the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever He chooses. One of the scriptures we cited last week for that, Acts chapter 17 and verse 26, and this is out of the New International Version. From one man He made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And He marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. And so last week we started with the oracles concerning the nation. We looked at Babylon, Assyria, Philistia, Moab, and Syria, or Damascus as it's sometimes called. And part of the reason we kind of hedged around this last week, Damascus is often used in place of the term Syria as the larger designation for that. And the reason for that, we haven't mentioned this, is a lot of the political setup during this particular time was not so much you had, obviously it was for Assyria, for Babylon, but most nations were kind of self-contained, and we would call them city-states. So you had a city of Damascus that ruled there and the surrounding countryside, not the entire world, but the surrounding countryside. And so that's probably why Damascus is used for Syria, because it was the largest city, if you will, in the area at that point in time. And as we started this, we said the first 12 chapters we kind of looked at in fair detail. These chapters, because it's more of the same bad news, we're just giving a cursory exam to those. You can read all the things you want to about them. But for class, we're just going to run through them fairly quickly so that we can move on to something else. The next one in the queue is Ethiopia. And here's part of the prophecy. They will be left together for the mountain birds of prey, for the beasts of the earth. The birds of the prey will summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth will winter on them. I find that an interesting turn of phrase. You ever heard somebody say, we're going to summer in the Hamptons? Or we're going to winter in Phoenix? And I'm not sure that's what Isaiah has in mind, but that's the way it kind of strikes me, that the birds of the prey, they're going to, as far as Ethiopia concerns, that's where they're going to spend their summer, because there's going to be food there from the destruction that they experienced as a result of God's judgment on them. Chapter 20, beginning in verse 3. Then the Lord said, my servant Isaiah has been walking around naked and barefoot for the last 3 years. This is a sign, a symbol of the terrible troubles I will bring upon Egypt and Ethiopia. For the king of Assyria will take away the Egyptians and Ethiopians as prisoners. He will make them walk naked and barefoot, both young and old, their buttocks bared to the shame of Egypt. Then the Philistines will be thrown into panic, for they counted on the power of Ethiopia and boasted of their allies in Egypt. They will say, if this can happen to Egypt, what chance do we have? We were counting on Egypt to protect us from the king of Assyria. And again, that backs up to one of the points we made last week. Don't trust your foreign nations to be your military ally, because they won't be there for you. At best, they'll say they will, and then they'll stab you in the back. But that's, again, pointed out there, they said, they can get at Egypt, they can get at anybody. And if we don't have Egypt, what do we have? Isaiah would say, you've got God. But Judah and Israel didn't accept that and would not acknowledge that. And so that was the end result for them, is they didn't have faith in God and suffered the consequences of that. So that was Ethiopia. And it's interesting there, Isaiah walking around naked and barefoot for the last 3 years. What a sight that must have been. You know, assuming this is literal, that he literally did that as a sign so that people would understand that, and then those other people, when they were captured, forced to walk naked. Again, those fulfillment of prophecies have a lot of power behind them. And then there's Egypt. Isaiah chapter 19, also mentioned again in Isaiah 20. Look, the Lord is advancing against Egypt, riding on a swift cloud. The idols of Egypt tremble. The heart of the Egyptians melt with fear. More of the same story. The waters of the Nile will fail to rise and flood the fields. The riverbeds will be parched and dry. The canals of the Nile will dry up, and the streams of Egypt will stink with rotting reeds and rushes. All the greenery along the riverbank and all the crops along the river will dry up and blow away. And again, we know something about Egypt. What is the source of life for the country of Egypt? The Nile River, isn't it? That's the only source of water that they have, and it supplies the land. And so you've got that where the Nile flows, the rich and green, because they can irrigate their crops and all of those things that went on. And so that was their lifeblood. And basically they're being told that lifeblood is going to dry up for them as part of God's punishment over them. And again, Egypt, there was Assyria. They were the big boys on the block. Egypt was the second-tier big boys on the block. And so they were the one that Israel and Judah might have looked to for help, for guidance, for strength, for protection. And Isaiah, from a message from God saying, they're not going to be able to help you because they're part of my plan of all this punishment that I'm doing on people who don't do my will. And then there's Edom, Isaiah 21, verses 11 and 12. This message came to me concerning Edom. Someone from Edom keeps calling to me, Watchman, how much longer until morning? When will the night be over? The watchman replies, Morning is coming, but night will soon return. If you wish to ask again, then come back and ask. Again, every once in a while there's that funny turn of phrase that Isaiah uses that you kind of smile at. Basically what they're saying is, kind of more in a figurative sense, when is all this badness going to be over? And the watchman is going to say, yeah, it'll be over. Sun will rise tomorrow. It's going to get dark again. Nothing's changing. Nothing's getting better. That point there. And if you want to know more, come back tomorrow and I'll tell you the same thing. And so it's kind of an interesting turn of phrase, I think, in what Isaiah is telling them. Arabia, some versions refer to it as Kedar, verses 13 through 17. Says they fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, and from the bent bow, and from the distress of war. Became refugees as a result of their nation being invaded. Judah, this is God's people. These are the people who were supposed to be protected by God had they been living according to His will. Oh, what a day of crushing defeat. What a day of confusion and terror brought by the Lord of heaven's armies, upon the valley of vision. So again, it's bad news after bad news after bad news. And I haven't mentioned this before, but for the sake of our visitors, for these scriptures here, we're using the New Living Translation if it doesn't read quite like your version does. We typically use New King James here. But for this, I elected to use this because it puts it in such plain speech that I happen to like it, so that's why we're using that. At that time, the Lord of heaven's armies, called you to weep and mourn. He told you to shave your heads in sorrow for your sins and to wear clothes of burlap to show your remorse. But instead, you dance and play, you slaughter cattle and kill sheep, you feast on meat and drink wine, you say, let's feast and drink, for tomorrow we die. That phrase is used more than once in the Bible, isn't it? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Now, I'm thinking And you can disagree with me if you think. I'm thinking when they say, let us eat and drink for tomorrow we die, they're not thinking about the coming of the Assyrians. They're not thinking about the coming of the Babylonians. What are they thinking? They're thinking, I think, this is life. Let's enjoy every last minute of it until we die, because once we die, that's it. Which maybe gives us insight into their mindset and their disconnect from God, because eat and drink and be merry for tomorrow we die, that's all life is, and they're forgetting that God promised so much more to life, including life after death, if they had remained faithful, but they couldn't see that. Glenn?
There's no regard for life.
Sure. No regard for life after death. Dave?
Paul quotes the scripture, 1 Corinthians 15:32. Says, if I fall for all peace and Ephesus as a mere man, what good does that do me? If the dead are not raised, let's eat and drink for the wrong time. You talk about the resurrection, and that. So, for those who don't value the resurrection, that's the thought now. There's nothing after this, so let's just have a good time.
Yeah, Dave points out that Paul quotes this scripture, this concept, or this idea. And really, if there is no resurrection, if there is no God, how should we be living? However we want to. I mean, not to be crude here, but if that was it, if there was no resurrection, no hope of anything after death, would you be here this morning? You wouldn't have got up on a Sunday morning, stayed in bed, watched TV, done something besides that. But we understand that that's not the way it is. There is a hope of a resurrection, and our life here is preparing us for that. And unfortunately for Judah, they weren't preparing for that. They had adopted the mindset, seemingly, that there is no God, almost maybe to the point, should we say, of atheism, or at least maybe agnosticism. Yeah, there's a God out there, but we don't know what he's doing or what he wants. And when he tells us what he wants, we don't like what he tells us, and so we're not going to worry about that. That was kind of their mindset, which is why they're in this problem to begin with. So again, good news after good news after good news after good news, isn't it? And that's why we're blazing through this, because if you're like me, I'm kind of tired of reading about all those bad things. Phoenicia or Tyre, wail, you ships of Tarshish, for your strength is laid waste. They were known to be seafaring people. That was the base of their economy. That was everything that they knew was based on their shipping, and it's going to be laid waste. Be ashamed, O Sidon, chapter 23 and verse 4. Wait, you inhabitants of the coastline, chapter 23 and verse 6. And a side note here, for those of you who like trivia and things of that nature, Tyre and Sidon are often mentioned together because they're close together, and they are kind of maybe a symbiotic relationship between the two cities. They work together, they ship together, had the same economy, and they're mentioned together 18 times in the Bible, and there's a list there, and you won't have time to write that all down. If you'd like that list, just let me know and I'll send you that slide. Postscript to that. For 70 years, the length of a king's life, Tyre will be forgotten. But then the city will come back to life, as in the song about the prostitute. Take a harp and walk the streets, you forgotten harlot. Make sweet melody and sing your songs so you will be remembered again. Yes, after 70 years the Lord will revive Tyre, but she will be no different than she was before. She will again be a prostitute to all the kingdoms around. Wow. Sounds like good news. If you stop. For 70 years, the length of a king's life, Tyre will be forgotten, but the city will come back to life. If you put a period there and left the rest of it out, that would be good news, wouldn't it? Okay, 70 years. There's going to be a 70-year captivity for Israel or for Judah, and then they're going to come back, and so there's some good news in that. But Isaiah doesn't stop there. The song about the prostitute. Wonder what that song was. We don't have any record of it. We don't know exactly what the reference is there, but it was something, obviously, that the people of Isaiah's day would have understood. They would have known what that song meant, the meaning behind it, all of that, and so they song about the prostitute. And basically, Tire's going to be down for 70 years, and when they come back, you're not going to be able to tell the difference 70 years later from what you had 70 years before. Some concluding thoughts on the oracles concerning the nations. And these are the lessons maybe that we could take away from this, that hopefully Judah was to take away from this. Number one, I don't know who said this quote originally, but I like what it says. There is a power behind every evil throne, Satan. But there is a power above every evil throne, God. Like I said, I don't know who made that statement. I read across it in the commentary, and they couldn't cite the source, but I like what it says. And the last phrase there's a power above every evil throne, and that is God. And when it says above, what does that mean? Higher than? In charge of? What was that, Glenn? Mightier than that. So there's a power behind every throne. You know, we hear a lot about the deep state in our country today, who's actually running the country, all of those things, who's pulling the puppet's strings behind the scene. Well, that first phrase there's power behind every evil throne. In a lot of cases, Satan's the one pulling the strings. And he is getting his way by manipulating, by using earthly people to do his bidding. But you have to remember that above all of that is a God who's still in control. And again, as we said earlier in class, that's where it gets so frustrating, I think, for us, because we can't see nor even understand why things are the way that they are. Because my response would be, God, why don't you just force peace on the whole world and make it nice? Just fix it all. Could God do that? Well, sure. No, God didn't have fingers, I don't suppose, being a spiritual being. He'd snap his fingers and everything would be just like we wanted it to be. But for whatever reason, God's not doing that. And I think part of the answer to that is this world isn't our home. If this world were the utopian place we would like for it to be, what would be the draw for heaven? If it's as good as it can get here, how can it be any better there? And perhaps that's part of the message that God's trying to give. This world is not your home. It was soiled in the Garden of Eden and will remain soiled until God will come, send Jesus again to collect his faithful, and his faithful will then live in that utopia that the earth was intended to be from the beginning. Except that in that place there will be what? No more sin, no more sorrow. He'll wipe every tear from our eye. And again, that means we're stuck with looking at a world that every time you turn on the evening news, it just seems to be awful, getting worse, getting more difficult. John?
These chapters 13 through 23 remind us as well that in our modern times with our archaeology, we find that these cities did exist, these empires did fall, and although we don't have the complete archaeological picture, historic picture, this reminds us in the modern days that God is his prophecy is 100%.
Yeah, John points out that through archaeology we found a lot of these nations that are mentioned that were destroyed, and the world finally covered over the ruins, and archaeologists found those ruins, dug them up. We have proof that these people existed. I think we've cited this before. The Hittites were one of the nations where those who scoff at the Bible say they never existed. We have no record of them anywhere, and they didn't exist, therefore the Bible is what? It's wrong. It's incorrect. Until the capital city of the Hittite Empire, Hattusis, was uncovered by archaeologists and proved everything the Bible said about them, and gave us a rich history through their writings about the Hittite nation and who they were. Again, there's a power above every throne that is God. And we have to remember that. Another lesson. No tyrant is stronger than death. Tiglath-Pileser III, king of the Assyrians, a formidable, powerful, granted evil person, He was the big dog of the world in his day. Where is he now? Dead. Buried. Probably not anything left of his physical remains now. For all that power, all that glory, death got to him just like it got to the lowliest of Assyrian slaves in his day and age. So we have to remember that no tyrant is stronger than death. And you think about all the tyrants we've read about in the history of the world. What happened to every last one of them? They died. And yet there's one individual, one person, who is alive in spite of death. And that would be Jesus. You guys know this story, don't you? And that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. Andrew Davis, in his book Exalting Jesus in Isaiah, back from 2017, says, these chapters, speaking of the chapters 13 through 23, depict God's sovereign power over the nations, his infinitely wise plan, and his omnipotent hand. It is vital for us as Christians to trust entirely in the God who thus rules over human history. The nations are restless, full of rage, completely unable to find peace in their wandering rebellion against God. We must not live like that. We must find rest in God alone, trusting Him to give joy and peace, even when we suffer at the hand of such restless empire builders. We must not be faithless, anxious over the restless churning of current events on earth, but we must learn to weep with compassion over the judgments God brings on sinful people, as Isaiah did. And again, that takes us back to that very first verse in chapter 13, the burden against Babylon. Isaiah's burden was that he was presenting and prophesying very, very bad news. And again, we've said this before, wouldn't the natural reaction of Isaiah be, God's going to punish these people, and it's about time they get what they deserve. It's about time they're punished for what they've done. And yet scriptures like this kind of seem to indicate that wasn't Isaiah's mindset, nor was it what God wanted Isaiah to think. That it was sad and a tragedy that it had to get to this point where these nations are being punished this way. We must learn to weep with compassion over the judgment God brings on sinful people, as Isaiah did. And that's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? When you think about all of the evils that go on in the world, for us to have the mindset to think, it's sad that they're receiving the recompense of their reward. And again, it's not a popular attitude, is it? The attitude is destroy them, punish them. And that's kind of what our human side wants. But we have to understand that God, again, New Testament passage, but it's as applicable to the Old Testament as it was to the New. For God so loved the world. And these are His people, whether they're Ethiopians or Egyptians or Moabites or whatever the nation happens to be. Those are His people. He created them. And He wanted them to follow Him. And first chapter of Romans, Paul spends some time talking about those nations who weren't part of God's chosen people, the Israelites, but who had and who lived according to the law. And again, by that we're not saying that they went to the temple and offered the sacrifices and the Sabbath and all that kind of stuff, but thinking maybe more along the lines of the morality of it. They understood what God wanted from them and lived that in their lives, even though they didn't know God per se as Israel did. And again, there is a certain, shall we say, moral code that is, I wouldn't say universally accepted, but by and large is accepted by most groups of people. And you have to ask the question, where did that moral code come from? And I think the Bible tells us that. It came from God. And while it may have been in so many places perverted or changed or ignored or thought silly, it's still there. And there are things that we we believe as human beings that can only come from God. Because survival instinct, our so-called Darwinian need to survive, the survival of the fittest, is opposite of a lot of those moral things that we do. Because basically survival of the fittest says what? What's that? Strongest survive and the weak don't. Too bad for them. And who do I want to be the strongest? Me, thank you. I want to be the top dog. I want to be the one who is the most powerful. And how will I do that? Well, if I have no morals, I'll do it however it takes. Whatever it takes to get that way. And again, you see that in thinking about these nations. That's how they lived. They're going to get what they want when they want it and don't care who gets hurt in the process. Keep in mind, God is still sovereign over all of that. And I think perhaps one day we'll understand that. All right, I've talked a lot. Thoughts, questions? Glenn?
Of the nations that still exist today, although they seem to be warring against one another, or they have internal war. Ethiopia has been in civil war for years and years. Thousands have starved to death and what have you. They continue on.
Yeah, Glenn makes a point that pattern continues on even in our modern world with some of these nations that are mentioned. Just continuing civil war and unrest and terrible things. And again, that's what happens when you don't follow God. Other thoughts? Until the end of the world, the people of God will often feel like the flotsam and jetsam on the waves of history. One mighty nation will rise to conquer the previous one, and God's people are usually merely along for the ride. But the elect from every nation are the centerpiece of God's purpose for history. Not merely debris on the waves, God's people will often be crushed on the threshing floor of God's judgment with cause to grieve over our own sins. Our citizenship is not on earth but in heaven. So while we wisely should pray for and seek the welfare of every nation on earth, we should know that someday they will all be destroyed. Christ alone is our final refuge. That was Isaiah's message, although he didn't say Christ alone would be the final refuge, although he sort of did in his prophecies about the coming Messiah. But he's saying to them at that point in time, God is your final refuge. Come back to him, and there will be refuge. Continue to stray from him, and all these prophecies are going to come true. And you're going to have to deal with those. 5 lessons from God's judgment on the nations, and these come from Jim McGuigan. Many of you may remember him. He's one of our brothers. He's still alive. I don't know if he's preaching much anymore. Jim McGuigan is from, I think, Scotland. I've had the opportunity to hear him on several occasions, and I love to listen to him preach. He's a good preacher, powerful preacher, but that accent it just captivates you. And he's an interesting guy. He's done a lot of writing. But these come out of the book of Isaiah that he published way back in 1985. And rather than reinvent the wheel, I just decided to use them. Number 1, God will not tolerate sin. Now, when I say tolerate sin, in my mind, what might that look like?
You mean to tolerate sin?
Yeah, what does it mean for God will not tolerate sin? And when I'm thinking about him tolerating sin, what might that look like for me? Okay. What did he do with Sodom and Gomorrah? Boom, it was over with. That's my vision of not tolerating sin, isn't it yours? And yet with all these nations that Isaiah is talking about, we're talking years and years and years of God. Let me use this phrase and you say something about it if you want to. He tolerated their sin. John?
I think we're more used to a real short window of time. When we see something, we tend to think, oh, that's the way it is, that's the way it's always been. If somebody gets away with something, we figure they got away with it, God let it happen. He's got a long vision in mind. And I think he allows things to happen in order to enact other things happening, and eventually he comes back. And just like we've seen, the evil nations were used as a tool to bring Israel around to what they needed to see. But those nations weren't let off the hook for what they did.
So when we say, based on John's comment, that he doesn't tolerate sin, it means he doesn't tolerate sin, but he doesn't always do it on my timeline of what I think it ought to be. Because God is long-suffering, Scripture says. And in the end of that verse it says, God is long-suffering, not willing that any should what? Perish, but that all should come to repentance. And so that's what we have to keep in mind. As John said, God has a long view of the vision. I can see right now, I can see and think about what's going to happen in the immediate future. I can see a little bit of that, but I cannot see the overall plan that God has. And when it comes to trusting God, we have to trust that in the things He's doing, even though I might want it to be happening now, He's got a time frame, and that time frame is perfect for His will. Redempta?
He's just not using that for us individually. 1 John 1:7, and what we want to see from God. And we have to worship the Father, and we love His Son, and His Son, and
Yeah, absolutely. Redemptive quotes 1 John. Walk in the light as He is in the light. And in doing so, the blood of Jesus Christ does what? Cleanses us, continues to cleanse us from all sin. And I think that's a good point to remember in this discussion about God tolerating sin. He's forgiving me of my sin continually so that I can have a home with Him in heaven. And that needs to be my thing that I remember. That I am having the forgiveness of sins, whereas those people out there who aren't repenting don't. So revel in the fact that I have the forgiveness of sins. Because God will not tolerate sin. There will always be a judgment upon sin. But that judgment comes in God's time, not my time. Elwin, you had a comment.
Yes, I was going to say, it says, now these things, you heard about Christ, you rejected Him, you accept Christ, you live the way God wants you to live, that He commanded us to live, you're all right. It's basically that back in those days, it's like we said, the angels and everybody else were looking forward to what was this promise, who was this person that was coming. Once that happened, it's like doors are closed, it's either way.
Okay. Elwin makes a good point that it talks about in these days, talking about the time of Christ, the time of His death, burial, resurrection, and establishment of the church. It's changed. He overlooked things. He was long-suffering with those people. But once Jesus has come, this is the way. Again, we're going to talk about this Sunday, September 1st. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I'm the life. And it's become crystal clear then everything that Isaiah was prophesying fulfilled in Jesus. And we have to understand that. Other thoughts, comments on that point? Dave?
On a personal level, we must realize that God's consecrated people suffer injustices, and it brings to mind the vision the saints underneath the throne of God. How long, O Lord, how long before we will get our justice? So, I have no doubt that in all the depredations from Syria and Babylon, they were good people who suffered along with wicked. And we need to keep that in our mind as well. Whether people live in the love of evil, we've seen it here in this country in the past, we probably will see it again, that destruction of property, even injury and death, that we need to leave it up to God.
Dave makes a good point that Christians, or not Christians, but God's people throughout history have suffered various things for various reasons at various times. And we have to understand that we're not immune from that in our own lives. And he points out the reference in Revelation where there are the souls under the altar who have been beheaded for the cause of Christ, martyrs for the cause of Jesus Christ. And their question is, how long, O Lord, until you avenge us on those people who did this to us? And what was his response? Let's go get them right now. No. He said, here's a robe. Just wait. I don't like waiting. Do you? Nobody likes waiting. But that was the message. Wait. Wait. Because God has a time frame. God has a plan. And that plan will play itself out. And you'll get exactly what you want, but only in God's time. And we have to have the patience to realize that that time frame might not include my lifetime. It might be in my great-grandkid's lifetime or great-great-great-grandkid's lifetime. Whatever he's chosen to do, I have to trust that right now I'm going to live for him, and in the end, it's going to be okay. How that's going to be, I don't know. It's going to be okay, though. That's got to be my mantra with life. All right? Go ahead.
Romans chapter 3, verse 25, the latter part of it, that this was to show God's righteousness, because in his forbearance he has passed over our sins. God does have forbearance of sin.
He does. He has a forbearance for sin. Paul talks about that in the passage Glenn cited there in Romans. He does have a forbearance. He would be within his right to Sodom and Gomorrah every nation on earth that's ever done anything wrong. And that would have been his right to do so. But he didn't, because he wanted people to come to repentance. He wanted there to be a way where they could see God's plan and understand that. So, again, when we say God will not tolerate sin, we understand that's the final thing we need to remember. But how he tolerates sin, or how he allows things to continue without the punishment, has to do with what he's seeing as the final outcome of all of that. Again, we've talked about this, so we'll kind of blow through this one. God is the Lord of the whole earth. We've got to remember that. He is in charge of everything, even though from our human perspective it doesn't seem like that when you watch the evening news. God will punish those who oppress his people. Again, what will happen to Assyria, who oppressed the 10 northern tribes and, to a certain extent, Judah? They're gone. What happened to Babylon when they oppressed Judah for 70 years? The Medes conquered them. And so they're gone. We've got time after time after time after time again of oppressors that God has punished. And God promises he will continue to do that. Real quickly, the other two. God is concerned about the world's sin, and we should be concerned also. And why should we be concerned also? Because we have an answer for that sin. Jesus. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That's our mandate. And number 5, God cares for the people of all nations, even those that are so sinful you can't see a hope for them. God cares for the people of all nations. Well, we're out of time. Appreciate your participation this morning, and Lord willing, we'll pick up next section of Scripture the following Sunday, and we're getting close, so we'll go as far as we can before the fall seminar, and then once the fall seminar hits, we'll take a break from Isaiah and come back to it, Lord willing, after the seminar is over. Thank you.